A 4-year-old street urchin abandoned with 5 babies on a rural road, but a millionaire witnessed it all and does something that shocks everyone. Watch until the end, you won't regret it. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The desperate cry echoed through the dirt road, like a cry for help lost in the middle of nowhere. Juniper, only 4 years old, clutched a wicker basket to her chest that swayed with fragile, gentle movements. Her little brown eyes were red from crying so much, and her tiny hands tried to shade the 5 newborn babies who whimpered softly under the scorching sun of rural Alabama. The girl didn't fully understand what had happened. She vaguely remembered her auntie saying that someone would come to get them, that everything would be all right. But there, sitting in the red dust of the country road, with the heat punishing her delicate skin, Juniper felt only fear and a responsibility too heavy for her small shoulders. "Shush, shush," she murmured to the babies, repeating the gestures she had seen her auntie do. Her tiny fingers gently touched their flushed little faces, trying to calm them. Juniper had always been a different child from the others, with a maturity that startled the adults around her. She seemed to carry on, her back experiences that a girl her age should never know. The sound of an approaching engine made Juniper raise her head, her heart pounding. Would it be her auntie coming back? Or would it be that person who was supposed to come for them? Her little legs trembled, and she instinctively pulled the basket closer to herself, as if she could protect the babies from any danger. Winston Abernathy was driving his car down the rural road with a look of frustration on his face. The business meeting hadn't gone as expected, and once again his plans to expand the cotton ginning operation had been postponed. At 52, he had built a modest but solid empire in the region, but lately he felt as if he were walking in circles, unable to move forward or backward. The ranch where he had lived alone for 10 years was his refuge and his prison. Since Beatrice had left him, after discovering that he couldn't have children, Winston had closed himself off. The silence of the big house accompanied him every night, broken only by the steps of Esmeralda, his oldest employee, who insisted on taking care of him even at 68 years old. It was then that he saw the small figure sitting on the side of the road. Winston slammed on the brakes so hard that the car skidded on the dirt, raising a cloud of reddish dust. His heart skipped a beat when he realized it was a child, a very small girl, holding something in her arms. He got out of the car quickly, his legs trembling slightly as he approached the scene that left him breathless. "Good heavens," he muttered, seeing the babies in the basket. "Little girl, what are you doing here?" Juniper looked at him with those big, frightened eyes, but there was a strange determination on her childish face. "Auntie said someone was coming to get us," she replied, with a voice hoarse from crying so much. "Did you come to get us?" Something squeezed in Winston's chest, in a way he couldn't explain. That scene reminded him of painful memories of his own childhood, when he was left on the doorstep of an orphanage by parents who couldn't afford to raise him. The helplessness on that girl's face was the same he had felt decades ago. "Of course, I came," he replied without thinking twice. "Let's get you out of this sun." Winston carefully picked up the basket, impressed by the weight of the 5 babies. Juniper stood up and held onto the hem of his shirt, as if afraid of being left behind again. During the ride to the ranch, she didn't say a single word, just watched the landscape through the window with a seriousness that didn't match her 4 years. The arrival at the Abernathy ranch was a commotion. Esmeralda came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron when she heard the car, but stopped in her tracks when she saw Winston getting out with a basket and a little girl beside him. "Winston, for heaven's sake, what's going on here?" she asked, quickly approaching when she heard the babies crying. I found them on the road, he explained, carrying the basket inside the house. They were alone in the hot sun. Esmeralda, who had raised 7 children of her own, immediately took command of the situation. She picked up one of the babies, examining it with an experienced eye. They're dehydrated and hungry, she diagnosed. We need milk, diapers, clothes. While Esmeralda organized the care for the babies, Winston crouched down to Juniper's level. The girl was standing in the middle of the room, watching everything with that disconcerting maturity. What's your name? He asked gently. Juniper, she replied softly. And do you know the babies' names? Juniper shook her head negatively. Auntie didn't say, just said someone would take care of us. Winston felt a pang in his heart. There was something in the way Juniper spoke, in the way she had taken care of those babies on the road, that deeply touched his oldest wounds. It was as if that little girl carried responsibilities that not even he, at 52, could always bear. Who is your auntie, Juniper? He asked, trying to understand the situation. The girl was silent for a long moment, playing with the hem of her dirty little dress. Don't remember too well, she said finally. She talked quietly with other women, said we were going to a good place. Esmeralda approached, carrying one of the babies she had managed to calm down. Winston, these children need urgent care, but you know we can't just... I know, Esmeralda, but for now they're staying here with us, Winston interrupted with a determination that surprised even himself. That night, after all the babies were fed and sleeping, Winston stayed awake on the porch, watching the stars. Juniper appeared at the door, carrying a blanket that Esmeralda had given her. Can't sleep? He asked. Juniper approached and sat next to him on the wooden bench. I'm afraid we'll have to leave again, she confessed. Winston felt his heart clench again. Why do you think that? Because it always happens, she replied with devastating simplicity. People always send us away. At that moment, Winston made a decision that would change his life forever. Looking at that brave girl who had protected 5 newborn babies under the scorching sun, he saw not just an abandoned child, but a little warrior who deserved all the love and protection he could offer. You're not going anywhere, he promised, running his hand through Juniper's unkempt hair. This is your home now. Juniper looked at him with those big eyes, and for the first time since he had found her, she gave a small but genuine smile. Little did she know that the next morning her new life would begin to reveal secrets that no one could imagine. The first few weeks at Abernathy Ranch brought a routine that Winston had never imagined having again. The silence that had once dominated the big house was replaced by the crying of babies, by Esmeralda's hurried steps preparing bottles, and by Juniper's sweet voice humming songs that she said she remembered from before. Winston had hired 2 more employees from the region to help care for the 5 children, but it was Juniper who demonstrated an impressively natural ability. The girl knew when one of the babies had colic even before he started crying. She could calm them down easily, and she seemed to have a maternal instinct that disconcerted all the adults. That girl has been through a lot, Esmeralda commented one morning, watching Juniper give a bottle to one of the babies with the dexterity of someone much older. No 4-year-old knows how to take care of newborns like that. Winston agreed. But every time he tried to talk to Juniper about her past, the girl became evasive. She only said that Auntie took care of her and other children, but she could never explain exactly where they lived or how she had ended up on that road with the 5 babies. It was in the 3rd week that Winston decided to start a more systematic search for the children's biological parents. He started by talking to acquaintances in the region, visiting registry offices and health centers, trying to find any birth records or information about mothers who had given birth recently. What he discovered left him deeply disturbed. During his investigations, he learned through Dr. Hayes, his lawyer and longtime friend, that in the last 6 months, 5 young women from the region had mysteriously disappeared. All were single. Mothers in situations of social vulnerability, some still teenagers. Winston, this can't be a coincidence, Dr. Hayes said during a tense meeting in his office. 5 women disappear, 5 babies appear abandoned with a small child. There's something very wrong with this story. But Juniper can't give me clear information about these women, Winston replied, running his hands over his face. She always talks about an auntie, but never describes who she is or where she lived. Dr. Hayes leaned over the table with a worried expression. Winston, I need to warn you about something else. You're taking care of children without any official documentation. This can bring serious legal problems. If someone comes claiming these children, or if the authorities find out. I can't just abandon them, Winston interrupted with a firm voice. Juniper has been through enough abandonment in her life, and the babies need constant care. That same afternoon, when Winston returned to the ranch, he found a scene that made him stop at the door. Juniper was in the yard playing with colored pebbles she had found near the creek, but it wasn't a common game. She had organized the stones in rows, separating them by colors and sizes with impressive mathematical precision. "What are you doing, Juniper?" he asked, crouching next to her. "I'm organizing the families," she replied, pointing to the pebbles. "The red ones are one family. The blue ones are another." Winston observed the arrangement and realized that there were exactly 5 groups of pebbles, each with different quantities. Why 5 groups? Juniper was silent for a moment, playing with a pink pebble in the palm of her hand. "Because there were 5 mommies," she said finally, so quietly that he almost didn't hear her. 5 mommies, Winston repeated, feeling his heart race. "Juniper, do you remember the babies' mommies?" The girl nodded slowly. "They cried a lot. Auntie said they were going to be okay, but they always cried." Winston felt a chill in his stomach. "Where are those mommies now?" "They left," Juniper replied, going back to playing with the pebbles. "Auntie said they had to go to a place far away, that the babies would be better off without them." That night, Winston couldn't sleep. Juniper's words echoed in his mind, creating an increasingly grim picture. 5 young mothers missing, 5 babies abandoned, a small child who talked about it all as if it were natural. The next morning, his investigation took an unexpected turn when he received a call that would change everything. "Winston?" The female voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but it took him a few seconds to recognize it. "Beatrice," he replied, surprised. His ex-wife hadn't been in contact for almost 2 years. "I heard through Carmen at the general store that you're taking care of abandoned children," she said with a tone that he couldn't decipher. "Is it true?" Winston hesitated. "How did you find out about this?" "In a small town, news travels fast, Winston. 5 babies and a girl. Is that true?" "Yes, it's true. I found them on the road, abandoned." "I'm coming back," Beatrice interrupted, with a determination that surprised him. "I need to talk to you personally about this." Winston was silent, processing the information. "Beatrice, I don't understand. Why—" "I'll arrive tomorrow afternoon," she said, hanging up before he could protest. Winston stared at the phone for several minutes, a strange feeling growing in his chest. Beatrice had been clear when she left him. She didn't want to know about children. She couldn't accept that he was infertile. She couldn't build a family through adoption. And now, suddenly, she was coming back just when he had found 5 babies. That afternoon, he watched Juniper, playing in the yard with more attention than usual. There was something in the way she behaved that indicated an intelligence and a perception far beyond her 4 years. When Esmeralda called for snack, Juniper carefully organized her pebbles before going inside, as if each one represented something very important. "Juniper," said Winston, calling her to sit next to him on the porch after dinner. "Can you tell me more about the auntie? What was she like?" The girl was thoughtful for a long moment. "She was tall, had black hair and wore a shiny necklace," she described. "She spoke nicely but sometimes yelled at the mummies." "Yelled why?" "When they didn't want to give up the babies," Juniper replied, with the devastating naturalness of children. "Then Auntie got angry and said they had promised." Winston felt a shiver run down his spine. "Promised what?" "That the babies were going to good families," said Juniper, raising her big eyes to him. "Like our family here, right, Daddy Winston?" Winston's heart squeezed at hearing how she had called him. It was the first time Juniper had used any affectionate term to refer to him, and the word "daddy" came so naturally from her lips that he felt his eyes watering. "Of course, sweetheart," he replied, pulling her into a hug. "We are a family." But while hugging Juniper, Winston couldn't stop thinking about the description she had made of the auntie, tall woman, black hair, shiny necklace. For some reason, that description sounded familiar to him, but he couldn't pinpoint the memory. It was only the next morning, when he was preparing to receive Beatrice, that the memory hit him like a lightning bolt. Beatrice had always worn a gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant, exactly matching Juniper's description. Winston sat heavily in his armchair, his heart pounding. Could it be? Did Beatrice have some connection to the abandonment of the children? But why? And why was she coming back now of all times? At 3 o'clock sharp, Beatrice's car pulled up in front of the house. Winston watched her through the window, noticing that she remained inside the vehicle for several minutes, as if mentally preparing for the encounter. When she finally got out, he could see that she was nervous, despite trying to hide it. "Winston," she said, climbing the porch steps with a forced smile, "you're looking well." "Beatrice," he replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Come in." It was at that moment that Juniper came running from the kitchen, where she was helping Esmeralda prepare the baby's snack. She stopped suddenly when she saw Beatrice, and Winston watched with growing horror the expression of recognition that crossed the girl's face. "I know you," said Juniper, with her childish honesty. "You talked to Auntie before we went to the road." The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice visibly paled, and Winston felt as if the ground was opening beneath his feet. The silence in the room stretched for seconds that seemed eternal. Beatrice stared at Juniper, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to force a reassuring smile. Winston felt the blood boil in his veins, but he remained controlled, waiting for an explanation. "Juniper, honey," said Beatrice, crouching down to the girl's level, "you must be mistaken. We've never met before." Juniper frowned, shaking her head with determination. "No, I remember. You were at Auntie's house, talking quietly. You had this necklace," she said, pointing to the gold pendant on Beatrice's neck. Winston took a step forward, his voice coming out more strained than he intended. "Beatrice, what does this mean?" "Winston, please," she replied, getting up quickly. "The girl is confused. Small children often mix people up, faces." "Juniper has an exceptional memory," Winston interrupted, observing every micro-expression on his ex-wife's face. "She can remember details that adults would forget." Beatrice ran her hand through her hair, a nervous gesture that Winston knew well from their marriage. "Okay, maybe. Maybe I met some people in town who were trying to help mothers in need, but that doesn't mean—" "What kind of help?" Winston asked, his voice becoming firmer. At that moment, Esmeralda appeared in the doorway, carrying one of the babies in her arms. "Winston, sorry to interrupt, but I found something among the little things that came with the children." She held out a small gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant. It was identical to the one Beatrice wore around her neck. The woman's face lost all remaining color. "Where did that come from?" Winston asked, taking the chain from Esmeralda's hands. "It was at the bottom of the basket, under the swaddling clothes," replied the employee, looking suspiciously at Beatrice. "I only found it now because I was washing everything for the second time." Juniper approached and gently touched the pendant. "Auntie Agnes had one just like it. She said it brought luck to families." "Auntie Agnes?" Winston repeated, looking directly at Beatrice. "Was that the name of the woman who took care of you?" Juniper nodded. "Auntie Agnes always said she knew of a good family who wanted babies. A family with a very rich man who loved children but couldn't have them." The girl's words fell into the room like bombs. Winston felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Beatrice took a few steps back, her hands trembling visibly. "Beatrice," Winston said, his voice dangerously low. "Who is Agnes?" "Winston, I can explain," she began, but was interrupted by Juniper. "Agnes isn't her real name," said the girl, looking at Beatrice with those big, innocent eyes. "The mommies who were crying always shouted Beatrice, and she got angry." Winston's world crumbled at that moment. Everything fit together in a horrifying way. His ex-wife knew his pain of not being able to have children, knew of his frustrated desire for fatherhood, had access to information about his routine and his usual routes through the region. "You orchestrated all this," he said, his voice coming out as a whisper laden with pain and betrayal. "You manipulated these young mothers so that I would find the children on the road." Beatrice began to cry, but they were not tears of regret. They were of despair at having been discovered. "Winston, you don't understand. I was trying to give us a second chance. You always wanted to be a father so much. Lying, manipulating, separating mothers from their children," Winston shouted, completely losing control. "How could you think that was a solution?" Juniper hid behind Esmeralda, frightened by the shouting. The employee hugged the girl protectively, her own eyes filling with tears as she understood the magnitude of the situation. "Where are the mothers, Beatrice?" Winston continued, approaching her. "What did you do to them?" They're fine," Beatrice stammered. "They're being taken care of in a safe place." "What place?" Beatrice hesitated, knowing that each word incriminated her more. "There's a house on the outskirts of Montgomery. Some women in the region help young mothers who can't afford to raise their children. They stay there until..." "Until what?" Winston insisted. "Until they recover emotionally from the separation." Beatrice lied, but her voice didn't convince. Even herself, Juniper broke free from Esmeralda's hug and approached Winston. "Daddy, Winston," she said, pulling on the hem of his shirt. "Rosemary's mommy didn't want to give her up. Auntie got very angry and said she was going to a place where she couldn't bother us anymore." Winston crouched, down to Juniper's level, trying to control his fury so as not to frighten her anymore. "Who is Rosemary, sweetheart?" Juniper pointed to one of the babies that Esmeralda was holding. Her mommy was the youngest, almost my big age. She cried a lot and said she was going to run away with the baby." "And what happened to her?" "Auntie called some men. They took mommy away, but they left Rosemary," Juniper recounted, with the devastating naturalness of children who witness violence without fully understanding it. Beatrice was visibly desperate now. "Winston, please, you need to understand. I did it for us, for our family. These women are too young. They don't have the structure." "You kidnapped mothers and sold their children," Winston shouted, no longer able to contain his outrage. "You used my desire to be a father to cover up terrible crimes." "It wasn't like that," Beatrice protested. "I wanted you to be happy, to have the family we always dreamed of. And you thought I would be happy knowing that my happiness cost the suffering of innocent mothers." At that moment, the sound of approaching cars caught everyone's attention. Through the window, Winston saw two vehicles stopping in front of the house. One of them belonged to Dr. Hayes. The other was an official car. "Winston," said Dr. Hayes, entering the house, accompanied by two men in suits. "I need to talk to you urgently. We received an anonymous tip about..." He stopped in mid-sentence when he saw Beatrice in the room, clearly in a state of panic. The two men who accompanied him introduced themselves as investigators from the district attorney's office, specializing in crimes against children and adolescents. "Ma'am," said one of them, addressing Beatrice, "you need to come with us for questioning about the disappearance of 5 young women in the region." Beatrice looked desperately at Winston as if hoping he would defend her, but her eyes met only coldness and disappointment. "Winston, please," she pleaded, "don't let them take me. I did everything for love." "For love?" he repeated with a bitterness that cut deeper than any scream. "You destroyed families, separated mothers from their children, and used innocent children as pawns in a sick game. That's not love, Beatrice. It's sociopathy." As they led Beatrice away in handcuffs, she cried desperately that she had done everything to give Winston the family he always wanted. But her words sounded empty, echoing through the Alabama afternoon, like a pathetic lament. Juniper watched, everything in silence, still hugged by Esmeralda. When the cars finally left, she approached Winston. "Daddy Winston," she said with a precocious wisdom that broke his heart, "are we still a family?" Winston picked her up, squeezing her against his chest. "We will always be a family, sweetheart. Always." But while consoling Juniper, a terrible doubt grew in his chest. If Beatrice had orchestrated everything to separate him from the children he had learned to love, what would happen now? Were the real mothers still alive? Where were they? And what if they wanted their children back? The investigator who had stayed to take his statement approached with a grave expression. "Mr. Abernathy, I need to inform you that the 5 mothers of the children have been located. They are forcibly institutionalized in an irregular psychiatric clinic. All of them claim custody of their children." Winston felt as if the world were collapsing again. After finding a family, after becoming attached to the children as if they were his own, he would now have to face the possibility of losing them forever. The days that followed Beatrice's arrest were the most distressing of Winston's life. Abernathy Ranch, which had transformed into a home full of life and children's laughter, was now enveloped in an atmosphere of uncertainty and impending farewell. Every smile of the babies, every affectionate word from Juniper, seemed like a gift that he knew he could lose at any moment. Dr. Hayes visited daily, bringing updates on the case, which was unfolding in an increasingly complex way. The 5 young mothers had been found in a clandestine psychiatric clinic on the outskirts of Montgomery, all forcibly medicated to keep them sedated and docile. Their emotional state was devastating. Months of forced separation from their children, combined with abusive psychiatric treatment, had left deep scars. "Winston," said Dr. Hayes on a particularly difficult afternoon, "I need to prepare you for what's to come. The mothers want their children back. It's their unquestionable right." Winston was on the porch, watching Juniper play in the yard with her colored pebbles. She had created a new arrangement. Now the stones formed a large circle, with all the colors mixed together. "Just one family," she'd explained to Esmeralda that morning. "I understand," Winston replied, his voice laden with pain. "I always knew this day would come." But how to explain it to Juniper? How to tell a 4-year-old girl that she is going to lose another family? "Maybe it doesn't have to be that way," said Dr. Hayes, pulling up a chair to sit next to his friend. "One of the mothers, Willow Sanders, specifically, asked to talk to you." "Willow Sanders," Winston repeated. "That name? She's Juniper's mother. She's 19 years old and was the one who resisted Beatrice's scheme the most. That's why she was forcibly institutionalized for longer." Winston felt his heart race. She wants to take Juniper away? She wants to talk first. She'll arrive tomorrow. Morning? That night, Winston couldn't sleep. He walked around the house, watching the children sleep, memorizing every detail of those little faces that he had learned to love as if they were his own children. Juniper slept peacefully in her little room, hugging a rag doll that Esmeralda had made for her. At 6 in the morning, she appeared in the kitchen, where Winston was drinking coffee alone. "Daddy Winston," she said, climbing onto a chair to sit next to him. "You're sad." "A little," he admitted, pulling her onto his lap. "Is it because of the woman who's coming today?" Winston was surprised. "How do you know that?" "Ms. Esmeralda talked quietly with the other girls," Juniper explained. "She said my real mommy is coming to get me." "And how do you feel about that?" Juniper was thoughtful for a long moment, playing with the buttons on his shirt. "I remember her a little," she said finally. "She sang to me before I went to sleep, but I like living here with you." "I like having you here very much too, sweetheart. But your real mommy went through very difficult times away from you. She loves you very much. And you? Do you love me?" "More than anything in the world," Winston replied, squeezing her against his chest. "Then why can't I have two families? The real mommy and you?" Juniper's innocent question planted a seed of hope in Winston's heart, but he didn't dare nourish it. The pain of losing her would be too great if he created unrealistic expectations. At 10 o'clock in the morning, a modest car stopped in front of the house. Winston watched from the window as a young woman got out, visibly nervous. Willow Sanders was thin, with brown hair tied in a simple ponytail. Her clothes were humble but clean, and she carried a small bag. Despite her youth, there was a determination in her eyes that impressed Winston immediately. When Juniper saw Willow through the screen door, she stopped playing instantly. For a few seconds, mother and daughter stared at each other in silence. Then, completely naturally, Juniper ran into Willow's arms. "Mommy," she said, as if they had never been separated. Willow burst into tears, hugging her daughter with a desperate intensity. "My girl, my darling girl," she repeated, covering Juniper's face with kisses. "Mommy never wanted to leave you. Mommy fought so hard to find you." Winston watched the scene with a broken heart, but also with a strange sense of completeness. For months, he had tried to fill in Juniper the void left by her mother's absence. Now, seeing them together, he realized that there was something he could never offer, the irreplaceable bond between mother and daughter. After the initial moments of emotion, Willow approached Winston. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice still, hoarse, "I don't know how to thank you for taking care of my daughter. Dr. Hayes told me everything you did." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, trying to maintain his composure. "No, that's not true," said Willow, shaking her head. "You could have handed her over to the authorities, but you chose to love her as if she were your own daughter. Juniper told me that you are her Daddy Winston." "She's a special girl," Winston said, looking at Juniper, who was playing in the yard, as if nothing had changed. "Can I tell you my story?" Willow asked. Over the next hour, Willow narrated her journey of pain and struggle. At 17, she had become pregnant with Juniper after a troubled relationship. The girl's father had disappeared upon learning of the pregnancy, leaving her completely helpless. Her own family had rejected her, and she survived by doing cleaning and temporary jobs. "When Juniper was born, it was the happiest day of my life," Willow recounted, her eyes shining. "She was so tiny but so smart. At 2 years old, she was already speaking full sentences. I worked all day and studied at night, trying to finish high school to get a better job." "How did you get separated?" Winston asked, although he already suspected the answer. "Beatrice approached me at the health clinic, where I took Juniper for checkups. She said she knew a rich family who loved children, but couldn't have them. She proposed that I lend Juniper for a few months, until I could stabilize myself financially." Willow paused, wiping away the tears that had started to flow again. "She convinced me that it was temporary, that Juniper, would have everything I couldn't give her, education, health, opportunities, and that later, when I was settled, I could come get her. But that's not what happened. Or when I went back to get my daughter, Beatrice said that the family had become very attached to Juniper and that I should forget about her. When I protested, she threatened me, said I was too young, too unstable to raise a child. The next day, men appeared at my house and took me to that clinic. Willow's story was even more devastating than Winston had imagined. For 8 months, she had been kept sedated, forced to take medication that left her confused and apathetic. She had only managed to escape when an employee at the clinic, touched by her story, helped her to flee. "Mr. Abernathy," Willow said, holding his hands, "I know I have no right to ask this, but can I make a proposal?" Winston looked at her, intrigued. "I want to take Juniper back. It's my right and my responsibility as a mother. But she talks about you with so much affection, with so much love. I see that you have created a true bond." "Where are you going with this?" Winston asked, not daring to nurture any hope. "I need to work to rebuild my life. I got a job on a cotton farm 20 miles from here, but the salary is low, and the house they offered me is very simple. Juniper was used to a better life here." Willow took a deep breath before continuing. "I would like to propose that Juniper stay here during the week, studying at the local school, and spend the weekends with me. I would work here too, helping Ms. Esmeralda, if you agree. That way Juniper would have 2 families, the mother who gave birth to her and the father who chose to love her." Winston was silent for several minutes, processing the proposal. It was more than he had dared to dream, but it also brought enormous responsibilities. "Willow," he said finally, "that would mean that we would have to work together for Juniper's happiness. It wouldn't be easy, I know, but I see how she looks at you. I don't want to take that away from her. I've already lost too much time in my daughter's life. And the other babies?" 3 of the mothers managed to re-establish themselves and took their children. One of them, Rosalie, asked if she could leave the baby here for a few more months, until she got a better house. The 5th mother, she's still very emotionally shaken. The baby will temporarily stay with the maternal grandmother. That afternoon, Winston called Juniper to talk about Willow's proposal. The girl listened to everything carefully, asking practical questions that surprised the adults. "So I'll have Mommy Willow and Daddy Winston?" she asked. "Yes, if that's what you want," Winston replied. Juniper thought for a moment, then went to get her colored pebbles. She arranged them into 2 groups connected by a bridge of smaller stones. "Done," she said, smiling. 2 families that are just one family. 6 months later, Abernathy Ranch had transformed into something even more special than Winston had imagined. Willow worked as the property manager, showing an intelligence and determination that impressed everyone. Juniper studied at the rural school during the week and spent weekends exploring the area with her mother, strengthening their bonds. Rosalie had managed to stabilize herself and picked up her son, but kept in regular contact, visiting them monthly. The baby, whose mother was still recovering, remained at the ranch, under specialized medical care that Winston financed. Esmeralda, now 69, had become the grandmother of all the children, organizing the house with a firm but loving hand. Dr. Hayes visited regularly, not only as a lawyer, but as a friend of the family that had formed in such an improbable way. On a Sunday afternoon, Winston watched Juniper and Willow play in the yard, teaching the other babies who occasionally visited the ranch how to draw in the dirt with sticks. The girl was now 5 years old and demonstrated impressive emotional maturity, a result of the trials she had faced, but also of the love she had finally found. "Daddy Winston," called Juniper, running to hug him. "Mommy Willow said you're the kindest man in the world. Is it true?" Winston laughed, pulling her onto his lap. "I don't know about that, sweetheart. But I know that you two are the most important people in the world to me, and we're going to stay together always. Always, he promised, looking at Willow, who was approaching, smiling. Forever, confirmed Willow, joining the hug. As the sun set over the Alabama countryside, painting the sky gold and pink, Abernathy Ranch breathed peace. What had begun with abandonment and suffering had transformed into unconditional love and a true family. Juniper had found not only one, but two people willing to love her forever. Winston had discovered that fatherhood did not depend on blood ties, but on choices of the heart. And Willow had proven that a mother's love can overcome any obstacle. The most improbable family had become the most solid, built on foundations of love, forgiveness, and second chances. And everyone knew that, regardless of the challenges the future might bring, they would face everything together as a true family. If you enjoyed this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.